I'm Dean Newlund, and welcome to the Business of Intuition, where I coach, facilitate, train, and speak on the hard science and meaningful experience of intuitive leadership in business, so you can make better decisions, forge real connections, and creatively solve problems to amplify your impact and simplify your life. Welcome to the Business of Intuition.
You know, for a couple of years, we had this virus called COVID-19 that went around the globe. But on the wake of that virus, another one was spawned, and that was fear. We are inundated with media, politicians, notwithstanding our old patterns and tapes from childhood that tell us that we should be victims, we should be a fearful person. And that has huge and far-reaching effects on our quality of life, our emotional intelligence, our health, our quality of relationships, the teams in which we are members of and lead, and the companies by which we are a part of, and overall, our whole society is dampened very strongly by this little word called fear. Fear, of course, is something that is natural and normal, and we need it for certain physical situations we need to be fearful of. But there are also emotional fear that most of us spend our time in. And that are situations where we don't necessarily have to be victim to this emotional fear that takes place. I did an exercise with a team recently about this very topic. I had everybody write down the 10 people they spend their most time with, and then had them rate each person individually on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 would mean that that person, by their estimation, lives their life and is succumbed by fear. And then on the other side of the scale, the 1 would mean that that person can move through life with, courage and hope. And so then, of course, you ask everybody to add up all of those scores divided by the number, which is 10. And that particular new number, that average score, is the sea in which we live ourselves in. This is the environment of our clan, of the people we spend most time with. And some people get very clear that they need to find some new friends. Others are aware that maybe they are a low number to somebody else's list. So it's a great little exercise that I would encourage people to reflect on. My next guest on the Business of Intuition has actually written a book called Unfear. And we had a really fascinating conversation. One of the things that really struck me was the idea that we shouldn't avoid fear. We use fear as one of those, like a fly that's in our office. We're trying to swat it, get on with it. If we ever were to announce to our leadership that we are afraid, we would be given that look like, what are you, weak? I mean, there's just so much connotations and deep-seated cultural, emotional things regarding this word fear. But his thought was, no, look at fear for what it is. And he thought it was a window into what we avoid, that there is so much lesson by which we can derive from fear if we are able to acknowledge it and understand where it shows up in our body, and to, in a sense, release that fear through a series of practices, which could be meditation, which could be running, but also supplanting the old messages that continue to inspire our fear with something new, almost like rewriting the code. And his name is Gaurav Bhatnagar, and a fascinating guy, worked for McKinsey. He's been around the world, and he and his partner have a company called Co-Creation, and they're all working on this particular topic about not from the top down, but from the bottom up, the individual, the team, the organization, about how we can transform our teams and our companies to be less fearful, more courageous, more about joy. Gaurav Bhatnagar on the Business of Intuition. Gaurav, it's great to have you on the show. Happy day before 4th of July. I know this is not being aired until probably several weeks later, but I wanted to tell you that, as I mentioned to you before we hit the record button, that this whole concept about fear has been really a topic that my clients and I have been talking a lot about. And I was just in front of a group about 2 weeks ago, and I said, in my own estimation, we had this a rather amazing destructive virus that went around the planet for a couple of years called COVID-19, but in its wake, there was a lot of fear. Another virus also spawned, the spawning of fear, which isn't to say that we haven't experienced it. It's been part of the human condition since day one. But it seems to me, at least, and the clients that I've been talking to agree that this has been a period of time where the fear seems to have been turned up. And people have been either courageously feeling it, moving forward with it, and making decisions, or being sort of stymied and stuck by it. And so I'd love to have your thoughts on this topic around fear, why you chose a book with that name in it. Must be something that you've been thinking about with you and your partner. So start us off. What was the reason for the book? What are you noticing in society today regarding fear? And then eventually we'd love to get some ideas from you about how do we move through this?
Sure. What a great introduction. So I like to say that the book started writing itself about 22 years ago when I was a young, hard-charging, don't take no prisoners consultant at McKinsey and Company. And life was a competition and I was going to win and I was going to destroy everyone in the wake of it. And unbeknownst to myself, it was such a drive of fear of not making it and not being relevant and not being a whole lot of things that I was eating myself up from the inside and I was burning myself out. And I was sitting in a workshop that I didn't want to be in. I thought it was one of those touchy-feely workshops. And, and something happened. Something happened in that workshop and I suddenly got to the realization that I was completely out in disconnection with joy and deeply driven by fear. And even though I was successful, I was deeply empty inside. And so I started exploring this topic about 22 years ago, mostly for myself. And then it became my passion in terms of how almost everyone I knew was getting driven by it without ever acknowledging it, and how it was impacting well-being and performance of organizations. And so this became my passion. And this book is essentially the outcome of 22 years of that journey. But as you're bringing it to COVID, as COVID happened, that was the last element of the fear, because we are a facilitation business where our work was all about going to our client organizations and facilitating. And suddenly COVID meant that you couldn't travel.
Right.
And there was no business. And, and the first instinct was, oh my God, my career is over. What am I going to do? And so on and so forth. And the question became, am I going to collapse into the fear, or am I going to see what is the opportunity it offers me? And that allowed us to reinvent ourselves in terms of writing a book, in terms of understanding what you could do from distance learning. And we pretty much from COVID created a whole new business. And to me, while COVID was an interesting experiment in humanity, it was also a wonderful opportunity to really reconnect back with myself and my family and then use it to create a whole new business model. And that's where Unfear was written as well.
Understood. So it was also almost like a journal that turned into a book.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. So what have you learned about yourself then through this journey relative to fear? You said that in the beginning with McKinsey, you were run by fear. And the realities of that world are that if you don't perform at a certain level, you get kicked out. And a lot of management systems certainly either consciously or unconsciously use fear as a tool to motivate and to move people into higher levels of performance. But what went on in your head that said, I need another path here? I get it. I got it that you had the wake up call. Neo got the phone call and it was time to go find Morpheus, right? You needed to do something, right? But the
most important thing for me, at least in my journey, is that you don't replace fear.
Yes.
Fear is always, right? It's how do you shift your relationship to it? So my relationship to fear was, it's something that I need to be super nervous about, and it needs to limit how I showed up in my life, right? And everything had to be done by a template and by a certain way society defined it. Otherwise, bad things were going to happen to me. What the work helped me do was understand that fear is actually telling you what are the things that you actually need to face and understand about yourself. And then from a detached perspective, look at it to see what is the opportunity to learn and explore rather than to conform and to stay stuck in, the proverbial comfort zone.
So let me ask you, is it that fear becomes a window into what we avoid, into what we don't want to see or be responsible for?
Absolutely. And therefore, it is one of the best doorways to learning and growth.
Okay. So I better believe what you're saying is right on. So if I'm afraid, you're at McKinsey, let's take you back there. It's a cutthroat environment. I get it. And you want to be relevant. So your identity and your success is in some ways in the hands of other people. It's very transactional. I do this, you give me that. My self-worth is not in my hands. My self-worth is in the hands of my boss. My validity, the value I create is in the results that I achieve, right? So that everything about self has been squashed to now who I am and what I am and how I do what I do. And the value I create in the world is no longer sourced by me. It's sourced by others who tell me whether or not yes or no. The exchange is, cha-ching, you got to say it, oh, you didn't, right? Is that kind of what took place, was reoriented to yourself?
Yeah, exactly. So it almost moved to mean going beyond the fact of recognizing that I'm not just a utility that people pay for, and my value is not driven by what other people think. What I'm here to do is to contribute, and I am already complete and whole the way I am. Now, it's a long journey. It's a whole process, but it's an intuitive understanding that you can joyfully contribute. And when you get to that place, you actually contribute even more. I am actually surprisingly more successful today than I was when I was in McKinsey. The only difference is that was a thankless, joyless, empty success. And this one is, I'm already joyful. And from that place, the contribution provides me even more meaning.
It's really interesting. I love the fact you said this. And those of you can't see this man, but he's just got this wonderful smiling face. His resting face is smiling, and I just love that about you. It's great to see you. So there's a lot of pressures. There's a lot of headwinds to not be that way, where you are the source of your own value. And that fear is something that we're being fed. I mean, one could say culture, how we were brought up. I'm taking it that you're Indian. Or did you grow up in the States, or did you grow up in India?
I grew up, first 26 years of my life was in India.
In India? What part of India were you in?
In Delhi.
Delhi. So, okay. So, and so you came over to the States for education or for a job?
No. So I first went to the Middle East, then I went to Hungary, then I came to the States.
Okay.
Then I went to South Africa, and then I came back to the States.
Fascinating. So did your culture, family of origin, where you grew up, did it support this? I don't know. This is hard to say this. I mean, it's too blanket statement, but this idea that fear is something that you should heed and that you should, that we should work towards acceptance outside of our own. Was your family, where did your family fall into your whole journey?
Yeah, so here's the interesting thing. When I was growing up in India, even though a lot of people go east to find, whatever you call it, peace, spirituality, whatever.
Yeah.
I grew up completely rejecting everything For me, it was all about material success, material success, material success. I was a son of a physicist who felt that he never quite achieved what he could have achieved in life. So I was constantly taught it's all about material success. And I actually found this in South Africa, of all the places. When
the aha moment happened in South Africa. So what was the event?
It was, the office in South Africa wasn't doing too well, the McKinsey office.
Okay.
They tried all kinds of things, all the standard McKinsey stuff. And there was this newfangled thing around mindset and around transformative thinking that was coming in from Australia. And they said, hey, we've got nothing to lose. We'll apply it to ourselves in our office. And I went into a workshop with someone who was an old British lady with an Indian name, Geeta Bellin. And I was telling all my fellow friends, cynical friends like me, don't believe her. Her real name is Margaret, And she was taking us through some reflective processes, and something clicked. Something happened that said, there is something wrong with this picture that you've created for yourself. And quite honestly, Dean, if you think about it, we live in a story. We all live in story. We have created certain stories based on our upbringing, based on our experiences, and we live in those stories. And basically, Unfear as a book is about saying, hey, the story you've created in which you live is not complete. And fear is actually telling you the parts of your story which are not complete. If you can see beyond the collapse that you have when you experience fear, and you can see the opportunity it's pointing towards.
All right, let's work. I love this. And I think, I buy into the idea that this fear is a window into something that we might avoid. Let's assume that, let's say I'm a manager in a company, right? Mm-hmm. I've got a toxic boss. Toxic means that this person leads by fear. They have really poor emotional intelligence. It's my way, highway. They have outbursts. They don't acknowledge people's individual contribution, let alone how they feel. And so they've created this sort of environment of fear. And so I come to work afraid by this particular person's behavior, right? Because my job might be at risk if I don't sort of fall in line, even though I don't agree with it. And I can sort of see that this person has some particular issues with respect to their leadership. This is the world and I'm living in right now, right? I could always probably find another place to work. What is the fear I'm feeling, and what's it telling me about myself per your ideas that fear is a window into things that we might be avoiding? What am I avoiding here?
Yeah, so this is fascinating, right? So the one orientation is, hey, it's all my boss, right?
Yes.
It's all my boss.
Yes.
And he or she is the problem. And I'm a victim in this situation because I can't do anything about it. Hey, that's just like at the same time, now, if you shift the focus onto yourself, what it's telling you is, hey, you're showing up as a victim. And what is it what can you do in this situation to speak for yourself and stand up for yourself? So there's something in this whole dynamic where I am not speaking up as well. I am not standing up for myself. I'm making myself smaller.
Okay. And right? I love it. I love it.
Have you heard of Viktor Frankl?
Sorry?
Have you heard of Viktor Frankl?
Yeah.
He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning.
Right.
Remember, he said there's a wonderful passage in his book, just a short one. He says, we who lived in concentration camps knew of people who gave away their last piece of bread, comforting others.
Yes.
And even though they were few in number, it provides sufficient proof that anything can be taken away from a man, but the last of the human freedoms, the ability to choose your attitude in any given set of circumstances, the ability to choose your own way. And so it's about learning that you are still a choice. You still have an ability to say something or do something. Otherwise, you're becoming part of the problem and you're propagating the problem with this dysfunctional boss.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. I agree with that. So I believe also, Gaurav, that, and I think you're saying the same thing, is that behavior, in a sense, follows our perception, our mindset. So, the fact that we're now aware of this, and there may be some people who are listening to this who are having hopefully some aha moments around their relationship to fear and their relationship to themselves, where they hold their power, whether they're a victim in their own story, all of those things. So there's another factor here. Again, let's assume that we also acknowledge that the media and politics are also sort of feeding us a steady dose of a diet that says we should be afraid of that. The TV shows we watch are stimulating that triggered fear response. And so even biochemically in our bodies, we might have situation with your dad, my mom, your mom, that happened when we were 8, 6, 5, that when we get into conflict with somebody, stimulates up those old issues and those old chemicals within our body. And literally, we are addicted to the chemicals that create that fear, much like we would with coffee or alcohol or drugs, right? I think Joe Dispenza talks about that in some of his work, the chemical makeup of the emotional state in which we put ourselves. So all that being said, one could go, you know what, Gaurav, I love what you're saying, man, but there's a lot stacked against me, they might be saying, right? Mm-hmm. I don't believe that. But how do we overcome all of these other influences that say we should be afraid? Not only political, not only the environment, not only the family we grew up in, but the triggers of our childhood. What did you do that helped re-establish a different pathway, that one wasn't about living your life as a victim?
Yeah. So we can spend 3 hours on this if you want.
All right. Well, let's start somewhere.
Yeah. So let me start by saying yes to everything, right? I mean, I think popular culture encourages us to be in a fearful state. In fact, it gives us, we get hits. The reason why breaking news is constantly on the news is because it gives us a hit, which makes us feel good, because we get candy from the fear that we experience and the adrenaline rush that we get.
Yes.
And the other thing I'll add to it is, even when you know that there's a right way of being, to stand up and behave differently from most people around us is incredibly difficult, because we are social beings, and to be socially isolated, even in our truth, can be extremely difficult.
Yes.
Right? So completely acknowledge this, right? So even though this is all common sense, making it common practice is really tough.
Yes.
So having said that, there are 2 or 3 ideas I would throw out.
Please.
The first one, which I'm sure many other speakers on your show may have talked about, is that your neocortex or your rational brain does not kick in when a fearful experience happens for about 8 to 10 seconds. And that's established brain chemistry. And by the way, that's really important to know, because we as human beings would not have survived if all we had was the neocortex in order to respond when we were living in caves and we were constantly facing danger, right?
Yep.
So fear is a useful mechanism to have when related to physical survival.
Right.
Most of the fear we experience today is emotional fear. And so the first thing to do when experiencing fear is to give yourself space and not to react immediately. And typically it takes 8 to 10 seconds for your neocortex or your rational brain to kick in, which then can give you alternatives to your first automatic response of fight or flight or freeze, right? So the first step is to pause. And it is to force yourself to pause. But in order to know that, to be able to do that, you need to tune into your own body to know where are the first signs of the hijack that you experience when you experience fear. When that boss screams at you, where in your body do you start feeling the adrenaline starting to go? Because if you know that, and most of us don't, then you can hit the pause, right? And once you hit the pause, you have to actually query yourself, because now your rational brain is kicked in. What are the historical patterns that you're repeating in this moment?
Good question.
What is it that is getting triggered in me? What are these patterns? Because different people have different triggers. For me, it might have been my dad telling me, hey, you're not going to be successful if you don't behave in a certain way. For other people, it might be something. And then once you understand the story, then you have to rewrite the story, because we have neuroplasticity. The science tells us that reality is the path you tread every day, and whatever you repeat to yourself every day is your truth. So you can repeat to yourself something else. So for example, my truth was that life is difficult and all it matters is success. And I shifted my story, and I literally had it written all over my home office, being that I could be successful and happy at the same time.
Yes.
So in those trigger moments, I had to break my pattern of isolation into a pattern of successful and happy, successful and happy, successful and happy. And when you start repeating to yourself something different, you start creating new ways of perspectives of seeing things.
And to your point, though, it takes time. It doesn't you don't just flip a switch and you no longer feel these triggers for fear.
Of course. And by the way, I still feel them. I mean, I've been doing this 22 years. The only thing is that I can check myself much faster, and those triggers don't happen as quickly, as often, and as quickly as they used to. But it's a practice. And it's not about how other people will show up differently. You don't switch your belief systems to fix someone else. You do it because it's the right thing to do for you. And if you create enough people with you, then you start shifting the system around you. That's the system effect in many ways.
It's such a great topic, Gaurav, because when you think about the ramifications of a person, a team, a company, who consciously or unconsciously are led by or run by fear, are triggered all over the place. They don't even realize it. Why? They are walking around doing their work at work from a victim perspective. I mean, you can start to extrapolate the cost of well-being and retention and health, let alone service to our customers and the viability of our overall future. I mean, it's kind of like one of the most important items that any company can address is this one right here.
In fact, we in the book say fear is the single biggest source of waste in organizations.
I think you're right on. It's interesting. You mentioned finding the fear where it shows up in your body. I thought I had a couple other ideas to what you just said. We were just doing this last week with a team, and they were involved in having to let some people go the next day. And so there was a lot of fear around this upcoming sad event. And so I had them sort of stand in this room and just sort of get into their bodies by breathing and connecting to, their breath. And then I said, so where does fear show up in your body? I mean, where it does, what point in your body? And so then I had them experience that, walk around the room, start again, clear it all out. Now, where do you experience positive power in your body? Different feeling altogether. It shows up somewhere else. Maybe it's in your chi, maybe it's below your belly button, whatever. Move around the room, stop. Now, can you start with the fear location and then have it be sort of like healed, if you will, by that other sensation around where positive power resides? It was an interesting experience for people. And it seemed to fit to what you're saying, is that it's good to sort of know and put awareness to where is this fear showing up in my life physically.
Yeah. And the only other thing I'd add to that, the other thing which might give hope to people is people often think that if someone has hierarchical power over us, they can dominate our emotion. The research says that whoever holds an emotion with greater intentionality infects the other person with that emotion.
That's a great point. So you're saying that
it doesn't have anything to do with hierarchy.
So if my intentionality is to feel peaceful and at cause for my own direction, likewise as saying I'm not a victim. Like if I have that intention stronger than the intention of my boss who wants me to feel fear, my intention wins out in the end.
You will actually calm the whole situation down dramatically. And by the way, the easiest emotion to infect someone else with is joy. The next two are anger and fear. So just knowing some of that, but most of us don't engage in life with deep intentionality related to our emotions.
Right. Right.
And
it's,
one of the other things in this work is that you have to be intentional.
That's right. Yeah, it's interesting because we have such a stigma around admitting that we're afraid, God, it's Western culture, go West, young man, cowboys, it's all about this sort of pick yourself up by your bootstraps. And leadership has sort of become this fearless, iconic individual who then transfers that same value to everyone that they have under them. And so therefore, we would never say to our boss, guess what? I'm going into a meeting and I'm afraid. Oh, what's wrong with you? You all of a sudden, you get this condescending look.
Yeah. And in my thing is that in organizations that are really high performing, they can talk about what experience they're having of fear and what is the learning in it for them, which is what they're going to go and reflect on as they go into that meeting. So that fear doesn't hold them as they go in. That fear just becomes an opportunity to explore how they will engage differently in that conversation.
Yeah, I really love that idea that fear is this window into what we avoid and what not being responsible for ourselves. There's been conversations I've had with clients where they're getting, re-stimulated by something that who knows how long ago it was. And they start feeling that fear and going back to your process, like where does it fit in your body? And what is it trying to teach you? What is the message regarding this fear? You find out that there's some sort of, what I would call it almost like a pre-written lie that we believed when we were much younger, that we needed when we were a kid just to get through the day. But now maybe it's not necessary when we're in our 40s, 50s, or 60s, or whatever. And to override, almost like thinking about it from a writing code. We're going to write new code over this lie, this BS that we've been holding on to, right? No longer necessary, with something that's truthful. The new truth is, I stand in joy, I stand in my own power. I'm, whatever you want to put into that, which would override the programming of the fear.
So Dean, the only other thing I'd add to this whole mix, which probably is a little out there, is the sustained way of clearing out that stuff is meditation. Because meditation actually cleans out the stresses that we have deeply embedded in our nervous system and the emotional baggage that we carry from our childhood. And if you have a regular practice of meditation over time, it starts cleaning out that gunk that the brain is referring to when it experiences those patterns of fear.
Yes.
And it removes those reference points so you do not feel as much fear within yourself.
I want to ask you about that because I've meditated at times a lot, and sometimes my experience with meditation regarding fear is that now I've got no distractions and nothing but my fear to inundate me with its loud voice. It's like, oh my God, I'm driving myself crazy with all these thoughts, and so I've found, well, that does sometimes work. Okay, no question. This is just me talking, but I find that I get so much different kind of experience. Like we live near a river, not far from our house, going down to the river and going for a walk or a run around the river. And by the time I come out, so I'm out in nature, maybe there's some endorphins with running. And all of a sudden, like all this stuff just sort of dissolves off of me. The fear that was grappling me before is gone. And now I got some positive new ideas. It's almost like I've had a written journal activity which is partly meditative all at the same time. And
running and nature are both meditative practices because they get you into an alpha theta state, both in
Right.
Okay. The alpha theta state is the state that meditation also gets you to. So meditation is not the only way, but the point is that that's the state in which you release the thoughts that come up and all of those things that happen. It's just release of patterns that are stuck in our nervous system. So some people do it through running, some people do it through prayer, some people do it through being in nature. There are many different ways of doing it, but you need to have something like that in your life.
So have a practice. So choose something. Yes, I think that's a great point. And I love the fact that meditation doesn't necessarily have to be cross-legged, sitting in a dark room for an hour and a half. It could be, to your point, going for a run or what have you. Wonderful stuff. So tell me a little bit about the book. I know that, you guys have this out and how people can connect to you and your work and your firm and, just tell us more about that.
So the book basically is a thesis which says that if you really want to transform an organization, in both in terms of performance and well-being, you need to start inside out. So you start with what is going on inside of you, then you work on yourself in terms of your behavior, then you work on what is going on inside the team under the waterline, and then the team, and then the organization, which is the complete opposite of what most organization theory says. And it's really fascinating because there are all kinds of incidents and experiences from our lives that allow us to share this whole process. And we basically, this is the work that we do is a company called Co-Creation Partners. So we are basically an organization that works in the space of organization culture, mindset, and transformation. And for us, it's fundamentally how do you create performance and well-being at the same time. So anyone who wants to reach out to Mark or I, Mark is the partner, is my co-author in the book, Mark Minukas. You can reach out to us either go on the website, cocreationpartners.com.
Yes.
Or you can go either Gaurav at cocreationpartners.com or Mark at cocreationpartners.com. And we would be happy to write back because we love when people ask us questions and the ultimate intention is to build a community of people who are in dialogue about this.
Yes.
So those would be the most common ways. You can also find us on LinkedIn, So I'm not much of a Twitter guy. Otherwise, I would have told you my Twitter handle. But typically LinkedIn or our website or email would be the best way. But the book is easy to get hold of. It's on Amazon. You can very easily get hold of it. And love to hear from people.
Yeah, I just saw it. I'm going to buy it, and you got some great reviews from people. So you obviously, I think you really struck a chord here. And those who are not ready for it, they're not ready for it. But those that are, you're going to attract a lot of people who are ready to do the work that you're so about.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's really been great to meet you. I really wish you and your partner and your firm all the best. I really do think this is just probably now more than ever. This is probably one of the most important topics that we should not just be thinking about, but we should be doing, and not wait for our organization to get its, life together regarding fear. That again is another victim perspective. We can start with ourselves. We don't have to wait for that. That's where it starts anyway.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks so much. Yeah.
Man. Thanks a lot.
Wonderful. You bet.
Real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to The Business of Intuition. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com.